videos you're proud of. Easily trim your video by selecting the words where you want to start and end. Color your presentation with automatic subtitles and highlighting keywords. Add your brand logo. Add music for an emotional touch. Add your contact info on an animated business card on all your videos. Easily replace green screen with an image or a video loop. Stand out with a web page with your logo, your video at the center, and personalized button for visitors to interact. It's one tap to simultaneously upload your videos on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Always know what to say next with the Big View teleprompter.
Hello and welcome to our Big View webinar this week. We're so glad you are joining us today. My name is Sharon Delaney McLeod. I'm a television journalist turned speaker, trainer, and coach. I am joining you from Morrisville, North Carolina, which is on the outskirts of the Research Triangle Park, or Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. As you join us, please let me know in the chat, where are you coming in from? And add your questions and comments into the chat feature. So if you're watching us via LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook Live, we will be collecting your questions as you come in. So please let me know. And let's see, where are you coming in from? I'm trying to check the chat here. Make sure to add your information below. But let me tell you about our session today. We are going to be talking about empathy in communication in our digital world. And what we know is that it is required to be able to build the power of connection and foster empathy in our digital world, because we've all become so attached and tethered to our digital platforms that sometimes we have forgotten about the way we are communicating, and empathy is required in order for us to make those connections. So we're going to be talking about the importance of empathy in communication. We'll explore how to effectively convey empathy through various digital mediums, including how to do so on the Big View platform. We're going to talk about ways to build genuine connections online and the impact of that kind of communication and how it will help you with your relationships, both professionally and personally. So let me go ahead and tell you about our speaker today who's going to be joining us. She is Maria Ross, who is a speaker, an author, strategist, and empathy advocate who believes that cash flow, creativity, and compassion are not mutually exclusive. She's the founder of a company called Red Slice, and she advises organizations on how to leverage empathy to better engage and connect. And Maria is an author of several books, including her most recent, which is called The Empathy Edge. She also hosts a podcast called The Empathy Edge Podcast. So please join me in welcoming Maria Ross to our Big View webinar today. Hey, how are you, Maria?
I'm great. How are you, Sharon?
Doing well. Where are you located?
I am located in the San Francisco Bay Area, just about 10 minutes south of the city, in a coastal town called Pacifica. So that's where I am.
Sounds glorious.
It's usually foggy, but today it's sunny.
Nice, nice. I feel like that area is where so many of the car commercials in our country are shot because of the beautiful coastal scenery, right?
Yeah, probably right off Route 1. Yeah, just south of here.
Very good, very good. Well, I'm delighted to have you join us in our conversation today, because I don't know about you, but Maria, have you found that over the years, as we have become more reliant on digital communication, that somehow we've lost the humanity or the empathy in the way that we all connect?
Absolutely. I think that's a big part of it. It's a big part of our ability to see other people and really be able to read them beyond just the words they might be typing in a text or what they might be showing us in their social media feed, right? So there are ways to get around that, though. And it's really just requires us to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more intentional with our communication if we're going to communicate in a digital world.
All right. So I would like to ask about a question that I feel like others have been wondering when you hear about empathy in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And there's different styles of leadership. And I feel like we are thankfully gravitating toward more empathetic leadership nowadays. But how does it apply in the workplace? Like, what does empathy at work mean? What is it and what is it not?
I love that, because I think a lot of misconceptions cause us to not embrace empathy in the workplace, and especially as leaders, right? And then, we can talk about what does empathetic marketing mean as well. But empathy in the workplace is simply a method of information gathering. It means to see, hear, and understand, and where appropriate, feel another person's perspective, and then use that information to so compassion is really empathy in action. You can have an empathetic mindset and sit with someone and understand their context and understand their point of view and how they see the world. But if you don't do anything with that information in terms of how you communicate.
Maria, we have lost some of your audio.
Oh,
now it's back.
okay, great.
Now it's back. So so let's readdress that again.
Absolutely. Empathy is really the ability to see, hear, and understand, and in some cases feel, where it's appropriate, another person's perspective, and use that information to act with compassion. So compassion is empathy in action. You can have an empathetic mindset and connect with someone cognitively or emotionally, but unless you do something with the information you get back, it's kind of wasted. And so, what are you going to do based on being able to see things from that person's point of view? How are you going to show up for them? How are you going to communicate? What words are you going to use? What actions do you think are most appropriate in that moment to help that person? And then what decisions are you going to make? It doesn't always mean that you have to do what the other person wants to do. That's submission. That's not empathy. But what are you able to ascertain about their context and why they feel the way that they feel? And I will say, a lot of times we get empathy confused with other things, right? Empathy is not about being nice. You can be really nice and bake really good cookies, but it doesn't mean that you're seeing another person's point of view. It also doesn't mean that I have to cave into whatever you're asking me to do.
That was what I was trying to think of, because I feel like hard charging business leaders would be like, well, does it mean I have to lower expectations?
Absolutely not. They can coexist. And actually, I have a new book coming out in the fall called The Empathy Dilemma, of how to balance people, performance, and personal boundaries. So just because I connect with you and I understand where you're coming from, and I hear you out and I try to provide support, it doesn't mean I change the business decision, right? We've had companies that have done layoffs in a horrific way, and companies that have done layoffs in a really empathetic way, because they are there for their employees and providing as much support, giving them space to vent, giving them space to process. That's what empathy is. It doesn't mean you necessarily change the decision because of the input that you're getting. And it also doesn't have to mean you agree with someone. You can actually be empathetic and see another side and listen to, oh, okay, I understand why you think the way you do. I still don't agree with you.
Yeah.
Because the goal of empathy is not conversion, it's connection.
I love that. Wow. I feel like in today's world, every single person needs a lesson in civility.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, what we see in the headlines and in the news is not necessarily the reality of what we're all experiencing, but tempers have shortened. Fuses are popping off much faster than they used to.
Right.
Now, when we think about, people make up companies, but as we think about brands, because brands now have this expectation of supporting certain kinds of behavior or certain causes, different things that are in our culture. How do brands embrace empathy? And do you have some examples of what that looks and sounds like?
Yeah. So in my previous book, The Empathy Edge, I talked about empathetic practices and habits for leaders, cultures, and brands, because my background is as a marketing executive and as a brand strategist. So that's the lens that I look at this work through. And you're absolutely right. It's about people taking actions that make us believe if a brand is actually empathetic or not. A brand is just a collection of people and their actions and the reputation they put out in the market. So where brands have tripped up is that they assume, kind of back to the myths, if we donate to the food bank once a year, that means we're empathetic, right? So doing good is definitely one of the practices of an empathetic brand. Getting involved in your community or in the pursuits of your customers and taking a stand on something that's relevant and aligned with your actual mission and values and isn't just like a left turn, right? So if you do good, but you do good on a consistent, genuine basis, yes, that can give people the impression that your brand is empathetic. But we saw lots of examples through the pandemic, especially, of brands that stepped up and with their actions used what they could to help their employees, to help their communities, to help their customers. We saw examples of brands that did not do that, and it did not end well for them, right? From a PR perspective. So if you think of, for example, Zoom, they told their sales force, do not exploit this pandemic for our own financial gain. We are going to give free K through 12 access to get us through this because our mission is about helping people connect. But we are not going to gouge people. We are going to do this because it makes sense for our mission and our values. We have this technology, we have this capability. Let's offer it in pursuit of what people need right now. And that's where the empathy comes in, seeing the world through the eyes of your customers or your prospects. You know, what is it that they need? What is it that they fear? What is it that they value? What can you do as a company or as a creator to provide that back to your customers or your employees? We saw companies increase mental health benefits. We saw companies, there's Netflix created a 52-week parental leave policy that is still in effect. So it's really like, again, it's not just about doing these things in the hopes that people believe you're empathetic, but is it in line with what your company believes and their mission and their values? And can you apply it for good and do it on a continuous basis, a consistent basis?
As individuals, and I think sometimes, and I don't know this to be true, and I know you've worked across different industries, but it feels like, and I'd like to know your insight on this, in healthcare, I feel like leaders in healthcare, the fact that they're even drawn into that profession or education, that it's almost like there's DNA empathy somewhere in there because it's punishing that kind of work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really interesting statement because there's a yes and there, right? Yes, there are certain professions that attract more empathetic people. There are also non-empathetic people in those professions.
Yeah.
That's very clear, right? But it's also about remembering that empathy is innate to human beings. Science has proven that that's innate to our DNA. It's how we have survived as a species. And it shows up differently for different people. But for some people, the muscle atrophies based on their upbringing or their work environment or just whatever they're exposed to on a daily basis. If it's not rewarded, if it's not modeled, if it's not celebrated, just like not going to the gym for 3 years, you know, you're not going to have six-pack abs anymore. You're not going to be in shape. But the good news is that at any time with intention, we can strengthen that muscle. And that's why I wrote The Empathy Edge, was to give that playbook of how are ways that we can strengthen our empathy as leaders. What are some practices that might feel weird at first or make us sore, but in the end are good for us? And so when I hear leaders say, well, I'm just not a people person, or I'm just not naturally empathetic, I call BS on that because it's a decision. It's like saying, I'll never be in shape because I don't eat healthy and I don't go to the gym, right? Or whatever, I'll never be healthy because of that. And so you have to make a decision that this is how you're going to lead. This is how you're going to show up. This is how you're going to infuse empathy into your business model. This is how you are going to choose to connect with your customers or your prospects or your clients, and make that decision and build that into your daily and weekly and monthly and yearly practices.
And speaking of practices, I want to ask about that in just a few minutes. But what you just said, actually, and this is teasing out a little bit more about industry-based sorts of leadership. But you're right. There's plenty of people who are not empathetic leaders in education and in healthcare. But I recently moderated a panel last week.
Mhm.
It is Workplace Violence Awareness Month. And in healthcare, the amount of violence that is happening against
Ooh,
healthcare workers who are there to serve their patients. And here's the
yes.
thing, in healthcare, if you are a patient and you show up and you're belligerent and abusive towards your nurse or your nursing assistants, guess what?
Mhm.
They can't throw you out.
Yeah.
In public schools, they can remove students like that, but as patients, they cannot. And
Right.
so there's this thing that I learned during this, that nurses and people in healthcare have a social contract, and it has been broken and severed very
Mhm.
seriously between that patient and caregiver. And that's what the empathy has dissolved. Like there's no empathy from the patient, right?
Ah,
How
yeah.
how do we fix these fissures that have happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the important points I always talk about when I do my keynotes or leadership trainings is that we also have to understand that empathy needs to flow both ways. So we
Yes.
can't necessarily be in a conversation and be like, you're not giving me empathy, so I'm not going to try to understand your point of view. And we see that a lot. And it's a good thing that the workplace paradigm has changed, the leadership paradigm has changed in terms of we are trying to become a more human-centered workplace because the old models of command and control don't work anymore in today's market, in today's environment. And that's sort of like a dying breed of those people. There are moments of crisis, of course, where command and control can work, but not on a daily basis, right? So we're seeing paradigms changing, and that's hitting everyone differently. So for millennials and Gen Z, this is actually the workforce they're demanding. They're saying, no, I'm going to spend most of my time here. I want it to be a place where I'm seen, heard, and valued. And good on them. Like that lifts all of us up, right? But there's also seasoned leaders who I have empathy for because they grew up with a different model. They grew up their entire career being told that this is how you lead and get ahead. And now all of a sudden we're going, nope, you got to change it. They're coming from a place of fear. And when we
Yes.
see this snap back to bossism, as I call it, post
Bossism?
it's this
Oh,
idea that these are folks that are scared, they're insecure, they don't know how to lead in a remote workforce, in a hybrid workforce. And so their response, they have now shut down their empathy to protect themselves. And they're saying, no, this is the way I know how to do it. This is how it works. This is how we're going to do it. And I don't care what anyone else thinks. When you start to shut yourself down like that as a leader, you have let your ego take over. And that's why, in my practices, and especially in the new book, The Empathy Dilemma, I talk about self-awareness and self-care are the first steps to being an empathetic person, actually, not even a leader. Because if you are insecure, if you're scared, you're going to meet any other opinion or viewpoint with defensiveness and fear. And so, that's the dynamic that is also coming into play in the healthcare environment. I spoke to healthcare providers for the new book, and how do you remain empathetic in the face of having to make a decision that is a life or death decision?
yes.
And it was stunning to hear, their ability to say, yes, I need to be there for my patient. I need to be human. I need to deliver news carefully. But in the moment when I'm saving a life, I can't be thinking about that. I have to work the case in front of me because that saves lives, right? So if they can do it in a life or death environment, surely we can do it at an office, right, that sells insurance.
Right. Yes. Exactly.
So yeah.
Yeah. What? Okay. So, all right. So I feel like maybe you've started to talk about some of these specific tips
Yes.
and practices for companies, leaders,
Yeah.
creators,
Yeah.
all of us to intentionally build this more empathetic brand to be able to create these connections. So I heard you say self-awareness and self-care.
Yeah,
And
that's actually the first tip of just strengthening your own empathy. No matter who you are, no matter what profession you're in, you've got to know yourself and understand your strengths and your triggers and your blind spots. And you have to take care of yourself, because if you are depleted, that's where you get to work and you have no patience. Like you said, the short fuse, it's just easier not to synthesize other people's points of view and just go with what you want to do, right? It's just easier to do that. And so when you're depleted, you can't make any space in your brain to be patient and be present and to see another person's point of view. From a brand perspective, though, it's, we talk a good game about being customer centric and oh, the customer's job one. But we've seen brands, big brands out there who have said that in their marketing and their advertising, but they don't walk their talk. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways when I work with brand clients specifically, or I'm helping solopreneurs brand their business or whatever, is that we have to speak the language of our customer. And sometimes we know more than our customer or our client does. And so you want to be speaking to them in the language that they use, instead of industry jargon, instead of something that is like over here and they're down here, right? We have to be able to see things from their point of view. And that requires talking to our clients and customers, or our ideal clients and customers, right? And capturing the words they actually use. How do they describe what you do? How do they describe the problem that they are feeling pain from? How do they describe the benefits they get from that solution? That's what should be in your marketing copy, in your sales copy, on your website. Because then they're going to read it and they're going to go, oh my gosh, it's like they're reading my mind. They're actually able to solve my problem. And so when I work with a lot of large tech companies and Silicon Valley startups, and they get so enamored of their own technology that I have to pull them back down and say, is someone really having a drink at a bar and communicating that really what would make their job easier is a best of breed solution that connects synergies of like whatever it is they're saying, ridiculousness, right?
Buzzword bingo.
Yeah, exactly. So you really got to, and what's interesting, I just want to point this out, Sharon, because I know we have a lot of creators on here, and the stereotype of creators or influencers or content marketers is that they're selfish and egocentric, right? That they're just about putting the camera on themselves and filming their own videos and talking about what they had for breakfast. The reality is that the most successful creators and the most successful influencers understand this principle of empathy. And they are creating content thinking, what does my customer or client need to hear? What are they interested in? What keeps them up at night? What problem are they trying to solve? What solution are they seeking? And they're creating content that speaks to that rather than just, here's all the things I want to say.
Yeah, exactly. They're creating a connection with their community.
Yes. And they're looking from the other side of the table going, how do they see the world? What do they need? What would delight or inspire or motivate them to take action?
I would be curious, our listeners and viewers who are joining us right now, if you all wouldn't mind putting into the chat, if you are a creator or you're making videos to reach whatever your audiences might be, are you focused and niche? Like, do you know who you're going after, who that target audience is? And as we wait for people to leave these comments, I'll ask you, Maria, have you heard of the Holderness family, Kim and Penn Holderness, the Christmas jammies?
Oh my gosh, I just saw their video, their Gen X video, which literally 2 days ago. And I was like, yes, and yes, like all of it, right?
Yeah, so they're really good friends of mine, and we are business partners. And when their brand blew up because of the Christmas jammies videos, really what their niche has been since day one is parenting. And so they have this very large, broad group of fans, millions upon millions. But if you're a parent, you will somewhere in their content connect because they are making light of or helping to bring a smile to your face for, shared challenges that parents have. Yes, and then they bring humor into it. And so they have built a very successful business over the last 10 years on having fun. But then they also bring some serious, if you listen to their podcast, they talk about some very serious issues, mental health issues, ADHD, different things.
Right. Well, because their niche is not necessarily about entertaining. It's about speaking to that audience. And I noticed someone had a comment here about, yes, we've tried, but niche doesn't seem to work. The challenge that I see in all the clients and the brand students that I've worked with is what gets in the way of them having a successful business that takes off is that they are trying to be all things to all people because they don't want to leave money on the table, right? Anyone who needs anything remotely connected to what I sell is my target audience. That is not true because if you look at, for example, Honda and Porsche, they both sell cars. They don't sell to the same people. They have a very specific value proposition. They target different buying drivers, not drivers, but buying drivers of what people are looking for. Honda is all about safety, reliability, and value.
Yes.
Porsche is about performance, speed, cachet, maybe, ego. I don't know what, whatever it is, but they're both selling cars, but they have a different lane they're playing in. They have a different, what we call strategic positioning. And it doesn't matter if you're a company of one or you're a company of 100,000 people. You need to know what lane you're in. Now, the reason a company as big as, let's say, an Apple or Microsoft or whatever can target more than like multiple segments is because they've got $1 million marketing budgets.
Multi-million-dollar.
Make it effective, right? Most solopreneurs, most small companies, most startups, you have to get known for something. And let me add, you don't want to get known for something that's so small. There's only 5 people in that entire market. So that's where people get wrapped up about like, oh, but if I target, if I pare down who I think I'm for, I'm missing out on all these other people. You know what? You're not, because you're going to be more relevant to the people you are speaking to, and more of them are going to convert to paying customers because they're going to know you are for me. Versus the one like, you and I are both women. There's lots of companies that target women. They're not all talking to me. They're not all talking to you. Now, if I'm going to go, let's say I'm looking for a life coach, right? I have a specific need I'm trying to solve. I don't want to just work with a life coach that coaches women. I might be looking for a life coach that coaches women in the middle of their careers looking for their next phase. Something a little bit more specific. Right? So don't be afraid don't niche down to like something that's a total addressable market of 5 people, but know your lane, know whether you are Honda or Porsche when you are creating content. And that's where it creates the empathy because it's now you're relevant to me. Now it's compelling. Now you get my attention. And if other people fall into that net that aren't the people you're trying to target, great. It means they have the same need. It means there's something about what you're saying that is resonating with them. So don't be afraid. Don't niche down so small. It's not sustainable, but don't be afraid to put a stake in the ground and say, this is who we help. This is who we support. And this is who we don't.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting because when you put this all into the context of a digital world, you have literally the entire world, anyone who's got connection to the internet. Yes. If you are able to connect with your customer, your ideal target customer through video, geography does not matter.
No.
And so, there's a much larger pool of candidates of that niche audience.
Right.
When you think about everyone around the world being able to dial into what you're doing. I'm curious. And
Mel, I just want to say something on that. To your point, that is why the relevance is so important because we can access messages from anywhere. Our attention is divided. So again, if I am looking for a specific solution as a 51-year-old woman who has a kid and I have my own business and I love to drink wine and I like getting outdoors, what's going to get my attention more? Something speaking to all women everywhere or something speaking to my specific needs? That's what's going to get my attention in this noisy world that we're in.
Yeah, and that's the noisy part. And unfortunately, the squeaky wheel tends to get most of the attention. And if you were to look at clickbait or headlines, it's all about grabbing your attention. And
Right.
so
Right.
when you have content that is compassion in action, which I
Hmm.
just love the definition of empathy,
Yeah.
that's where it's not a short-term gain. It's going to be a long-term
Yeah.
relationship that you're cultivating with these potential audiences over time.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I used to work in advertising years ago, and it's not about the Super Bowl ad that everyone's talking about. It's the Super Bowl ad that everyone's talking about, but they also bought from,
Mhm.
right? So attention is great, but revenue is better. So if you actually want to convert those people into customers that want what you sell and they need what you sell, then you've got to go quality over quantity
Sure.
because your conversion rates will be higher.
Now, what would be some brands, and a brand could honestly be, because there are people who are brands.
Hmm.
And as I think about Mel Robbins, for example, or
Yeah.
Adam Grant, I mean,
Yep.
Adam Grant to me is almost the definition of empathetic leadership. He's written the book, many books on
Yeah.
what that looks like. And
Yeah.
even though he would not describe himself as a speaker, he's done a TED talk, he's done all these amazing, and he speaks frequently.
Hmm.
Would you consider him to be a good example of an empathetic brand?
I mean, yes, I love his work too. I I know he talks about empathy, but I've never had any direct dealings with him. So I don't,
Mm,
who knows, right? It depends on the experience. It's not just what we say, it's what we do that makes
sure.
us and that's the thing again, like I mentioned earlier, where companies go, oh, we're empathetic because we put out a bunch of social memes in support of racial justice.
Yeah, and then look at
Yeah, what did
all
you
the
do
companies that are walking it back now.
Exactly. But what did you
Uh,
do internally to change things, right? So, what was the experience of your company? How did you operationalize empathy? And so that's what we want to look for. We want to look for a company that is, I always talk about brand and culture being two sides of the same coin because brand needs to start from the inside out, not the outside in. So, who are you? What are your values? What is your mission? What are your policies, your procedures, your practices, your communication style? All of that has to be exuding empathy and come from an empathetic place if you want the market to believe that you have an empathetic brand. Because to your point, everybody's online, which means everyone's dirty laundry is online, and it's much easier for people to peek under the hood of your business to say, well, your ads look great talking about how empathetic you are, but here's all these complaints about people that got screwed by what you did, or like it was poor product quality, or whatever it is. The ability to expose a brand for not walking its talk has never been greater. And
mm,
so it's got to start from the inside out.
yeah. Uh, this past weekend, I flew and I was on an
Uh-oh.
airline that, they all pride themselves on taking off on time, landing on time, and they're measured.
Yeah.
That's all
Yeah.
measured, and there's metrics are released each year.
Mm-hmm.
And because of a mechanical error, we had to return to the gate. So
Mm-hmm.
we were an hour and a half late leaving, which then meant we missed our connection. So then we caught before we landed, and we were able to, they rebooked us automatically. We still got to where we were going about an hour and a half late, but there
Mm-hmm.
was already an email in my inbox apologizing for the inconvenience.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we are adding 1,000 frequent flyer points to your account. Please accept this as part of our apology for not doing our best today.
Wow.
And there was a lot of apologies from the captain, co-captain, and the flight attendants. And so
Right.
I felt like, okay, they talked, but then they also walked by adding those points to my frequent flyer account.
I'm so glad you brought up that story because I actually mentioned two stories in the Empathy Edge about three, two good ones, one not so good one about airlines. They're just ripe for that because
Yeah.
we all can relate. And the funny thing is, everyone's got their own opinion about, based on their experiences, which airlines are the empathetic ones and which aren't, right? So I highlighted, I mean, for me, it was Southwest, and I told a story about how they delighted my son was 3 at the time, and we were flying on his birthday. And without even asking, the crew had like put together this little birthday cake out of like toothpicks and peanut bags and like toilet paper. And they didn't have to. And they did. They
Yeah.
were like, oh, wow, that really sucks to be stuck on a plane when you're 3 and it's your birthday, right? So I gave that example. I gave some other examples. But it's also that thing where what you said earlier about it's people's actions, and people take actions within their jobs based on the culture. Because most people that, again, are in service professions do like to help, do like to do something, but has the culture given them enough of a free rein to make decisions in the moment and act with empathy? And I think what you saw happening was part of it was policy. Like, we've actually operationalized empathy. When this happens, do this, put points into their account. But also the personal apologies you got from people, that is something that the culture was rewarding and celebrating and communicating, to say, this is how we treat passengers. Because we've all been on those flights where that's not part of it, right? So I think that's so important. Again, why they're all interrelated is you got to have the culture that's rewarding and modeling and celebrating and saying, this is how you find success here. Treat people this way. And you hire those kinds of people, but you also encourage them, you give them the environment for that empathy to thrive. Because there's also been really good people that have worked in really bad work environments and had the empathy sucked out of them, right? Just because that's the culture that was there. It was cutthroat. It was, fear-based. It was, I'm sure we've all worked for companies like that. So I think that that's just a really important point of understanding that if you want individuals within a company who are representing your brand, even partners, do you have a culture? Do you have an ethos of, this is how things happen here? This is how we treat people. And I just want to add to that, I've been the recipient of a horrendous online customer service experience where they didn't even want to listen to me. They just paid me off. They gave me like a free gift certificate or something without even like listening to what the problem was. And I felt like they tried to buy me. And it was actually a backfire of empathy, because there was no real connection. There was no real like, wow, that was really not acceptable that happened to you. And here's what we're going to do to change it. Then if they would have said, and to your point, like what happened to you, to be part of our apology, here is, something to reward you. That would have been a much different exchange than before you even hear what happened. Just here's a $50 gift certificate, go away, which I didn't spend with them because it was like, I'm not doing business with you anymore.
Maria, I'd like to, looking at some of these comments that have come in, Tammy says, yes, culture matters so much. Thank you for bringing that up. I want to create content for widows who are grieving alone. Some culture thinks grieving should be a private matter. Yes, culture, and that does play a big piece of it. Tammy, that's an excellent,
a great point.
Thought. And there's understanding. That's part of being empathetic, is understanding that cultures have different ways of approaching.
Well, and that's what, for Tammy, like just what comes to mind, if I can workshop Tammy a little bit while we're on this call, is, then that's part of your ideal client profile. Is maybe, I'm not saying you exclude those cultures, but you speak to people who know that it's healthy to grieve in community. For some people, right?
Yes.
Then you're going to attract even the people from those cultures who don't think it's appropriate, who are like, but I think it's appropriate. So I'm going to be drawn to what Tammy provides, because I'm not actually getting that from when we talk about culture, their actual culture, right? And so that's why being really crystal clear about your philosophy and how you view the problem is so important in your brand messaging and brand story, because then you're going to attract those people that you think you wouldn't have attracted based on other demographics, based on other psychographics, but you might be resonating for them because they want to break away from that. And so the clearer you are about like, why do you believe that it's healthy to grieve in community? Why is this an important thing? What are some of the statistics around that? Something like that, where someone can go, yeah, even though my culture tells me this is not appropriate, this is something that I need.
And, and Tammy just added, she is a widow with 3 young children. So she's asking, should the niche be widows with children or just widows? And I think that, Tammy, you are, and this is my opinion, but as I see it, you are representative of a very specific group of widows who are still rearing young children, different from my 88-year-old mom who is a widow.
Yeah.
And so it might be quite different. So it's unfortunate that there probably are a sizable number of widows, maybe under the age of 50, who are still really heavy in the child rearing years. And so that's something very specific.
I'm going to offer a slightly different take on that, because depending on the message that you have for the widows, it might not. Yes, you can talk about the challenges of raising young children, and now something that you thought you were going to be doing with someone else, you're doing alone. But the way that you talk to widows about their philosophy of grieving may very well resonate with an 85-year-old widow or an 88-year-old widow, even though that part of it is not relevant for her. And I always use the example of like gaming companies, video gaming companies, right? Way back when, now they do a better job of targeting like middle-aged men with mortgages, right? But back then they were targeting teens, right? But it resonated for the people that weren't being targeted. People like my husband, who had a wife and a mortgage and a dog and was still gaming, right? Now they do target those specific niches. But what I'm saying is, it doesn't mean you have to. Having an ideal customer profile isn't like a VIP line at a club where you're going to go, I'm sorry, if you don't check the boxes, you're not allowed in here.
Yeah,
you put your specific message out there. And then if it resonates with people outside your target market, that's okay. You can still accept them, decide to accept them as customers or clients, but it's about where you're going to put your focus and your energy. So if you really feel it's important to target widows with young children, then a lot of your content, a lot of your marketing is going to be focusing on that pain point. But it doesn't have to preclude someone who is a widow whose children are grown from saying, but I like the way she thinks. Her philosophy resonates with me. Her content resonates with me, even though it's not relevant to me on every level.
Yes.
So I'm going to get on board.
Those are such great points. I'll say, Maria, and I've done a TEDx. I did a TEDx as well about how and why you should speak to bereaved parents.
Oof.
And when I did that, I was very clear to include people who have lost young children, children who are grown, miscarriages, and stillbirths, because they are all still bereaved parents, and it includes everyone. Yeah. So I'd like to, if it's okay right now, talk about being able to connect with audiences through this digital world and being able to use the tools that are here with us, that we have available to us. And if we're stuck, how we can use some of the tools, for example, that Big View offers us, which is frankly like AI writing. Like, let's say you've got a topic and you're trying to create that script, but you want to make sure you have an empathetic lens to it or delivery. So not only do you have the words, but the way in which you're saying them.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and that's where, it's kind of gotten, what's the word, downgraded a little bit in recent years about putting together ideal client profiles or ideal customer profiles. It's still a core part of the brand engagements that I do. Because again, if we think we're talking to everyone, we're going to end up connecting with no one. We can't always feel like we have a megaphone and we're talking to a large crowd, because then you can't connect. And so building those ideal customer or client profiles, it doesn't mean that if someone who doesn't match my profile of Sharon, who's X number of years old and lives in this place, and here's what she values, and here's what she fears, and here's what her life is like, it doesn't mean I'm going to exclude anyone who's not Sharon, right? But when at least for me, when I'm writing books, when I'm developing keynotes, when I'm creating content, I try to think of that one person that I'm trying to connect with when I'm filming or when I'm on stage, and try to deliver the talk for them. Because again, ultimately it will resonate with people outside of that circle. But if we try to go into creating content with how can I attract the most amount of people, right? Or how can I appeal to the most amount of people? That's where you start to water down your content. And then it's what I always say is if you try to be all things to all people, you end up being nothing to no one.
Sure.
So maybe not every piece of content you develop or every video you create is going to be relevant to everyone in your audience. That's okay, right? Your friends that you mentioned with the videos, like I'm sure I could go through their video catalog and there's going to be a few that don't feel really relevant to me, and that's okay. But the vibe is there, right? And I understand like this is a place I want to come back to. This is a place that I'm probably gonna have 90% chance of finding something that is relevant for me. So too many entrepreneurs and creators try to build scripts. First of all, they try to go viral. Don't do that. Work on the content. And if the content is good, it'll go viral, right?
Yeah.
If it connects, if it engages, it'll go viral. I have had my most vulnerable and off the cuff and unplanned social media posts that were not in my social media marketing calendar exponentially have more engagement because they came from the heart.
Yes.
Versus like, okay, on Tuesday we're doing this and on Wednesday we're talking about that and Thursday I'm like, oh, I got to think of something to write. And it's all still valuable, but it doesn't connect with people. Yeah. So think about that one person when you're writing that video script or you're filming, talk to them. The best piece of advice I ever got was from a creative director at the advertising agency that I worked 4 years ago. And he said, the reason so many print ads, as an example, fall short is because people think they're talking to a crowd. But when you read a magazine, how many people are reading the magazine? One.
One at a time.
Talk to that person as they're consuming your content, as if you are just talking to them. And I would say that the same is true of video.
I'm looking at a couple of comments here. Recognizing individuals and appealing to their individual needs with an empathetic lens helps them to connect and reconnect. What do you think are the 3 major barriers to this, and how can we deal with them? Ooh, 3. Don't know if we can come up with that many. But
it also depends. I would love them to clarify. Are they talking about technology barriers or just barriers for us to make that connection, right? Because I can talk about barriers to making the connection is that you can have some people I've had, now that I talk and speak about empathy as a strategic advantage, I always get people coming out to me going, oh, I'm such an empath, blah, 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 blah. And I've also heard people use empathy as an excuse to hurt people's feelings.
Oh.
So I am empathetic. So I'm telling you what I feel. And I'm, if that's too harsh for you, well, I'm just really empathetic. I just tell it like it is. And I just no, that's not what empathy is. And so I think that sometimes we can get caught up in thinking that to be empathetic, we have to immediately be a mind reader and understand what you're going through. And then when I'm trying to be empathetic with you, I'm saying like, oh, I know exactly how you feel, blah, 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 blah. Don't make assumptions. The best tool you can use, curiosity. Curiosity is the #1 trait of empathic people. And it's because they don't make assumptions. They don't guess. They ask. And the more that you ask and you say these 3 magic words, tell me more.
Tell me more.
And the more they'll reveal to you what their perspective is and how they see the world and what their context is. And now you can have a conversation, right? But the ability, it's not even an ability. I don't know what it is. It's something in us like, but if I'm going to be empathetic, I have to say just the right thing to the person, right? In order to connect with them.
It's more true. Listen more, talk less.
Exactly. You don't have to guess, because also remember, when you guess and you assume, your own unconscious biases are coming to play. Yeah. So you might be assuming something really wrong, really off base.
True.
Yeah.
So as we start to wrap up our conversation and thinking about, I want to be able to offer our viewers some very practical things. We've talked about the whole, how we're embodying being empathetic and thinking about that approach and how you deliver that. But as I think about the practical things, when you are connecting through a digital platform, whether it's Big View or whatever, being empathetic through that digital platform and the way that you speak, the way your communication comes across is almost more important than the words. And so in thinking about, after 20 years of being a television news anchor and reading off of teleprompters, and people are like, I don't want to sound like I'm reading. And you're right. You never want to sound like you're reading.
Right.
But there are ways that you can turn on the video and just speak. And maybe you put just a few notes, not full on sentences, but just a few reminders, key terms, or bullet points of things you want to cover when you're connecting with that audience and that one person that you're speaking to. I once had, early in my career when I was a news anchor, someone said, we want to make sure you don't sound robotic when you're reading into the camera. And so they suggested, why not put a picture of your mom or your best friend right on the other side of your camera?
I love that.
And look at that face instead of the little green dot that we're all looking at into our camera. Look at that person that's meaningful to you. And when you can do that, when you're looking at the lens, it will help you come across more authentically. And that is the compassion in action. And hopefully you will be coming across more empathetically.
I love that, because with my client, when I'm working on my brand strategy work and working with those clients, that's something I encourage them to do. Like when we give them the final report, we have stock photos of the profiles we've built out, so they can picture someone in their head. And I love that, because I've heard of companies that do that in their customer service departments. They have like avatars of their customers. They have pictures of some of their real customers up in front of the engineers that are designing the software, up in front of the people taking the customer service calls, to say, remember, there is a human being on the other end of this. And
this is the end.
One thing to that, which I love about you talking about the teleprompter, but also with video, I remember I was redeveloping my course, Brand Story Breakthrough, and I was filming videos to promote it. I've been filming videos to promote it. And someone that it's in like an accountability group with me, was saying, I'm just so scared to film video because I lose my place. I pause, I hesitate. And I'm like, but that's what makes it charming. Like, that's what makes it human. Like, I just lost my place and I couldn't find the right word, and that's okay. Like, we can be human, you know, maybe not on the news, but when we're filming these videos and we're creating content, try to be as conversational as you can. And it's okay if you make a mistake. If my podcast, my guests lose their, we lose our train of thought all the time, or we can't think of the right word. We just keep going. Because then people feel like they're overhearing someone's coffee talk, for example. And so bring people into that world, and don't be afraid to be a little bit unpolished on your videos, because that is actually the human side of it that brings people in.
Yes. Oh, and I love that. That is a great way to wrap up our conversation. Maria, how can people connect with you?
I love it. Well, I hope my main hub is red-slice.com. Folks can find some free resources on there, a free webinar I just created on 4-step framework to craft a magnetic brand story that attracts your right fit clients. I have other free resources there. I have the podcast, The Empathy Edge, and they can connect with me on social. I'm Red Slice Maria on Instagram, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn, Maria J. Ross. Just leave me a note and tell me that you heard me on the podcast.
Excellent. All right. Well, I have been taking notes as we've been going through this. I just love all the different things that we discussed today. And I hope that every one of you who joined us today can take away a couple of tips for you to start to infuse empathy into your own work right away. And thank you all for joining us from Scotland, LA, Florida.
Scotland. My husband's from Scotland. Yay.
Oh, Scotland. And I thank you all so much. And Bruno, thanks as always for being a terrific producer and keeping us on time and moving forward. And Maria, it's been such a pleasure.
Such a pleasure.
I've enjoyed our conversation so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next. Ever before, the way you communicate can make or break your career. Hi, I'm Sharon Delaney McLeod. I'm a television journalist turned speaker and facilitator working with leaders and their teams to amplify their impact. In our hybrid world, it's crucial to connect with each other in meaningful ways. In fact, new research shows that effective communication has become the most vital competency and non-negotiable skill that modern leaders must flex to keep their teams engaged and productivity high. I invite you to follow my content for professional development best practices, podcasts, articles, and videos that will help you drive business results. I look forward to partnering with you in person or virtually to level up what I call your power skills. Hit the link below to start a conversation.
Videos you're proud of. Easily trim your video by selecting the words where you want to start and end. Color your presentation with automatic subtitles and highlighting keywords. Add your brand logo. Add music for an emotional touch. Add your contact info on an animated business card on all your videos. Easily replace green screen with an image or a video loop. Stand out with a web page with your logo, your video at the center, and personalized button for visitors to interact. It's one tap to simultaneously upload your videos on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Always know what to say